A good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. We've got a packed show for you today. A little later in the program, we're going to look at some new ways the U.S. military is apparently using drones to monitor citizens at demonstrations. Our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez is going to tell us about how they're being used to monitor groups of all sizes on both sides of the border in just a little bit. But we have some incredibly big, major developing news to tell you about, so let's just get right into that right now. If you haven't seen today, we are following breaking news out of Dallas, where a shooter apparently targeted an ICE field office and detention facility. Now, a lot of things are coming in, and here's what we know now. Now, according to officials, this happened just after 6 o'clock this morning. The FBI says the shooter opened fire from an elevated position at a building that was next to the building. The victims apparently were all detainees at that facility. 3 were shot, and so far 2 of them have died. The other condition of the other victim, that third individual shot, has not yet been released, and we are working to find out what happened with them and how they are doing at the moment. The FBI said that no ICE officials were injured in this attack. Now, moving on to the shooter, the FBI said he was found dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he reportedly fired multiple rounds at the building. Several officials from the federal level all the way down to the state level are reacting about this. In a post on social media, FBI Director Kash Patel posted an image that he says shows ammunition that was found at the scene. Patel and the FBI said the unspent rounds contained, quote, anti-ICE messages. Now, this is very similar to things that we have seen in recent months. But to continue, the FBI said the shooting is, quote, an act of targeted violence. Senator Ted Cruz was at the scene this morning with other officials, and he said that this is the third alleged incident where ICE or Border Patrol agents have been the target of violence.
This is the third shooting in Texas directed at ICE or CBP. This must stop. To every politician who is using rhetoric demonizing ICE and demonizing CBP, stop. To every politician demanding that ICE agents be doxxed and calling for people to go after their families, stop. This has very real consequences. Look, in America, we disagree. That's fine. That's the democratic process. But your political opponents are not Nazis. We need to learn to work together without demonizing each other, without attacking each other.
Now, as you just heard Senator Cruz say a moment ago, he referenced the doxing of federal agents, and that is something we have been talking about in just this past weekend, as we've reported right here on Border Report Live. Governor Gavin Newsom of California signed a bill into law that requires ICE agents and other federal agents to be maskless and not have masks on, and the response from the federal government was that those alleged doxing incidents of agents is the reason why they are not going to comply with that state law. If we have time later in the program, we're going to have more on that from our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. But moving on in this breaking news, there was an attack on July 4th at the Prairieland Detention Center in Alvarado. That's just southwest of Dallas. Now, according to the Associated Press, a local police officer was shot in the neck in that ambush-style attack. He luckily survived, but 11 people so far have been charged in that incident. In another shooting in July, you may remember I reported on this one live from the scene the morning it happened, and we brought it to you here first on Border Report Live. But in July, a man fired dozens of rounds at a federal agents at a U.S. Border Patrol facility at the McAllen International Airport, which is just about 30 miles to the west of us here in Harlingen in the Rio Grande Valley. Now, an officer who responded to that scene was injured in the shooting. The shooter was ultimately shot and killed by law enforcement. And again, if you remember the reporting from that day from on the scene, very similar thing. We saw messages inscribed all over the vehicle that shooter who was taken out by federal agents had written all over the side of his car. No word on what those messages were or if they were actually anti-ICE messages, but they were messages and inscriptions nonetheless detailing and leading into that attack. Now, officials in Dallas today are saying the shooter had anti-ICE motivations, But again, those detainees appear to be the victims of this shooting. Now, in a statement, ICE said the following. ICE and Dallas police have secured the scene at our Dallas field office where a shooter opened fire on the facility this morning, firing indiscriminately at the building, including at a transport van in the Sally Port. We can confirm that 3 detainees were shot in the van and the 2 are deceased. The shooter is also deceased by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No ICE officers were physically injured, and we are working alongside the FBI and local law enforcement on this ongoing information. Now, this ICE detention facility is in a busy central part of one of the largest cities in the state of Texas. Now, as you can see there, it's that little red dot in the middle of your screen. The building backs right up to Interstate 35, which is a heavily traveled area, and there are shops, office buildings, people who live, work, and play in that area surrounding the entire facility. There are also hotels where travelers from the nearby airport, Dallas Love Field, typically stay. As mentioned in that statement from Homeland Security, the shooter fired at the building's Sally Port, which is a secure or fortified entrance with multiple doors or gates, but apparently a transport van outside the building was right in the line of fire. Now, we are going to continue to monitor this story and post updates on borderreport.com, or if we get them while we are here live on Border Report Live, we will bring them to you as soon as we get them. Now, we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some new ways the U.S. military is using drones to monitor citizens at demonstrations. Our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, is standing by to tell us about how drones are used to monitor groups of all sizes on both sides of the border. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Now, there's controversy over the use of military drones to monitor demonstrators in the U.S. Now, this happened over the summer in Los Angeles, and we're not just talking about like those little drones that you can go and buy at Best Buy or another big box store. We're talking about MQ-9 Predator drones. Now, according to the Los Angeles Times, a California lawmaker has filed a bill to ban the use of those military drones to monitor demonstrators, and it has the support of local officials there. Civil rights groups also warn that drones threaten civil liberties and First Amendment rights. Now, this was the first time drones were used to monitor protests since 2020 following the death of George Floyd. The Times saying their use reflects a change in how the government is choosing to deploy the aircraft once reserved for surveilling borders and war zones. And now let me bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, to talk more about this. Julian, you've seen these drones in the past. Can you tell us about what you've been seeing recently?
Hi, Rudy. Good to be back on the show. What I can tell you is that a couple of years ago and even last year, I saw extensive use of drones, like you said, along the Rio Grande, along the U.S.-Mexico border, when we had large crowds of migrants. I think we have some videos that illustrate the point. And those drones were used not so much for crowd control as for monitoring the activities of the hundreds and sometimes thousands of people who were trying to come across the Rio Grande from Mexico into the U.S. Here in El Paso, I did see drones fly over when groups of migrants were coming across the river and bumping against the razor wire barriers that the Texas National Guard put on the American side. And the drones were placed there to monitor primarily activities of either rushing the barrier or cutting the barrier or somehow sneaking under or through the barrier. So that's what I saw. And it was quite an aggressive use of drones, sometimes coming in pretty low, I guess, to identify exactly who was trying to sabotage the razor wire or who was coming in. For the most part, I can tell you it was just families trying to sneak across, get past the Texas soldiers, and surrender to federal authorities during the Biden administration days, which aren't that far back. We're talking even just prior to January. So there you see some of the crowds that used to gather at the border prior to Trump, and why drones were used at that time. Now, I can tell you that we've had a few protests against immigration policies in El Paso, but by far, those protests have been peaceful, and I have not seen here in El Paso the deployment of military drones to monitor those protests. But the demonstrators themselves, whenever they congregate people, they call them to those gatherings. They emphasize themselves. This is a peaceful gathering. It is a peaceful protest. So I think it's kind of commensurate when the military or the federal law enforcement uses aggressive monitoring techniques commensurate to the tone of the protest. At least that's what we've seen here on the border.
Yeah, speaking of migrant encounters, they have been creeping up just a little bit, but they're still within those historic lows that we've been reporting over and over the last few months. Border Patrol arrests along the southwest border jumped 37% from July to August, according to newly released data from CBP. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, July 25th was actually the lowest amount of apprehensions, and I might be off on that day specifically, but it was in July that we saw the lowest amount of apprehensions in a very, very long time across the southern border. What else are you kind of seeing in this data?
Well, Rudy, here at Border Report, we alerted the public to this trend even maybe even 4 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we have the benefit of being able to monitor and report on both sides of the border. If you monitor Mexico, you know what's coming to the U.S. So we knew this was coming. And what's going on is there's a couple of dynamics. We have seen change from the Venezuelans, the Ecuadorians, the Brazilians, even the Turkish nationals that approached the border during the Biden years. What we're seeing now is Mexicans. We're seeing mostly Mexicans, and we are correlating that to an increase in social media ads by people who we presume are the cartels, telling people in southern Mexico primarily, hey, asylum is back on, the border is back open. So that's kind of responsible for the creeping up of the numbers. As you see there in the chart, the El Paso sector, as well as your Rio Grande Valley sector, mm-hmm. are the ones that are receiving the highest number of people right now. And even though we're still very low, you do see the increase, and you see the pattern. Those are two areas in which cartels are very, very active. Obviously, you have the Gulf Cartel right there in Matamoros. You have various elements of the Northeast Cartel or the old Zetas operating in Laredo. So that's what's drawing the new numbers of migrants from Mexico. In El Paso, obviously, we have two cities, an American city, El Paso, and Juarez, Mexico, just right smack together, separated only by the river. The two downtowns are separated only by the river. So that population cluster obviously makes it easier for the cartel to tell people, hey, you can get lost in plain sight with so many people all over the place, not just at the border crossings, but just people doing the regular thing, going to businesses, going to homes right smack next to the Rio Grande.
It's interesting because in the previous administration, Kamala Harris, the former vice president, she was kind of, thrust in charge of taking care of the southern border and immigration. And a couple times we heard her actually say in these, very public events to migrants, do not come. And we've seen that message just taken, turned up to an 11 by the Trump administration, telling people, do not come, you're not welcome. And that's leading to this drop in numbers. But, how difficult is it to get that message across when you have the cartels on the other side sending those social media messages, those targeted ads to people?
Well, let me put it in perspective, Rudy. Over here on the U.S. side, all of us have a smartphone. All of us practically watch the news. We get bombarded by these messages from the administration, from the Border Patrol. In Mexico, it's very different. First of all, people work there 6 days a week. And a lot of the people are coming in from rural areas where not everybody's tuned in to social media all the time or mm-hmm. watching television or listening to the radio. So they get contacted by local groups, local gangs that work with the cartels. They get contacted at public places. So it is almost impossible for that message to get to rural communities, not just in Mexico, but also extending a little bit to the northern triangle of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. How do you get that message? First of all, that is mostly in English. Mm-hmm. There are some Spanish spots. But how do you get that message across to people who are really have better things to do than be on social media all the time or on television all the time. And this just plays into the hands of the cartels and the smugglers and their associated gangs, all the way from cities to small towns in rural communities in Mexico and the Northern Triangle of Central America.
You know, one of the things that we saw in during the Iraq War, and it was we would have people going out, you know, from village to village to speak with local officials in the local villages and to kind of give them the messages of, you know, if you're harboring a bad guy, we're going to come after you too. If you're doing this, we're going to come after you. You can help us, or, you know, you're going to be thrown into the mix with it. Is that kind of, you know, essentially door knocking kind of messaging going to be what needs to be done to get that message across to people that may want to, you know, make that journey with a coyote or pay a cartel member to get over across the border?
That is certainly part of the puzzle. However, you have to realize that up until a year ago, the Mexican government took a hands-off approach to directly opposing the cartels, the famous hogs, not bullets. That had changed, I would say, a lot since President Trump came into office, and President Sheinbaum is doing everything possible to keep her country from getting sanctions from the U.S. for either not combating illegal migration or not, for not combating drug trafficking, or for not being clear on illegal migration, specifically on smugglers. So that would help. The big challenge there is that you need the cooperation of local law enforcement in all these rural communities, in all these small towns, even in some of the Mexican cities where the cartels operate and spread this misinformation. And that's very tough because, number one, the local governments usually don't have the personnel, the manpower, nor the resources, and that sometimes if they try to do stuff like that, they might come in the direct line of fire of the local cartel or the local gang. So that's going to be very difficult to get the message across to these villages and rural environments where the messages from the cartels are coming through.
You know, a lot of the tariff situation, and the tariff situation here in the U.S. is obviously a big deal because President Trump is the one leading this kind of, you know, tariff economic war with other countries. But when it comes to these South American countries, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, those tariffs are tied to their work on stopping not just illegal immigration, but the combating drug trafficking as well. How crucial is it going to be for the federal government in Mexico to really step up to, you know, really get this message across? Because again, you know, this is something that's could impact their entire economy.
Well, I think now it's become part of their policy. Mexico is a very institutional type of government. They usually don't respond to, random pressure. They usually modify their laws or enact a policy that's supposed to be followed throughout the Mexican Republic. But it is crucial that Mexico continues this messaging, at least through its federal officers, for smugglers, migrant smugglers, to be held in check. And as far as the drug trafficking, like I said, there's a lot of challenges. Sometimes federal officials in Mexico are imperiled if they push too hard.
You know, speaking of drug trafficking, I wanted to kind of switch gears here because we had an incredible guest that from the Cato Institute, Mr. David Beer, excuse me, join us to talk about, you know, who's doing the most drug trafficking in America. And come to find out, it's actually American citizens that are doing this. Kind of fill us in a little bit about that.
Yes, Rudy. As you know, our show and our Border Report is followed not just by members of the public, but also by members of law enforcement. And I did get some indications that, well, maybe you guys need to give a full picture of what's going on. Yes, for the longest time, and this is not recent, for the longest time, it's been American citizens primarily who get caught with drugs. But let me go into the nuances. Let me explain why that is. If you look at seizure data from Drug Enforcement Administration in the interior of the country and U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the ports of entry on the border, you will see that most of the drugs are seized on the border. And coming from Mexico, they're seized at the border. And why is that? Because the drugs are held or produced or transported through Mexico. Now, to get them across the border through the ports of entry, which right now have become the weak link in the chain of border security when it comes to drug trafficking, because drugs are so easy to stash on your person, on your glove compartment, on your vehicle. What happens is that to cross that border, you need to be lawful, either a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. So most of the people coming across are U.S. citizens. Most of the drugs coming across from Mexico into the U.S. Are coming into ports of entry. So hence, a U.S. citizen needs to be bringing those drugs. I got some information from the U.S. Sentencing Commission that shows, yeah, absolutely. 84.5% of individuals sentenced in the U.S. for drug trafficking offenses or for drug smuggling are U.S. citizens. However, there is a high percentage of people who of Hispanic origin among those statistics. And again, the reason is very clear. Because you're crossing the border, because you're a U.S. citizen, you're probably living in these communities that are heavily Hispanic. Brownsville, 90% Hispanic. El Paso, 80% Hispanic. And the cartels, the drug traffickers, obviously recruit local people who they can speak to in the same language. 70% of us here in El Paso speak Spanish or another language other than English at home. So they need to communicate with them. They need to trust them, because cartels are very family, very centralized command operations. They don't trust just anybody. Somebody from Minnesota comes in to the border, crosses the border, and says, "Hey, I want to take some drugs." They're either going to laugh at him or do something worse. So it doesn't happen that way. Locals are heavily targeted, like Mr. Beer said last time. Primarily those who don't have a job, those who have either gang affiliation or relatives who have gang affiliation, people that the cartels or traffickers will trust. And that explains why such a high percentage of those U.S. citizens are either people from the border or people of Hispanic descent. They're being targeted by the cartel.
You know, something interesting of note when it comes to those people that are being targeted to, work for the cartels is sometimes down here we see these reports from, for example, DPS's Operation Lone Star, and you'll see the ages of some of these traffickers, and we're talking teenagers, right? 18, 17. I believe I even once in the last couple of years saw a 16-year-old that was human smuggling specifically, but, they're really targeting these young people, as you said, without jobs. Have you seen that over on your side, the targeting of young people to do the dirty work for the cartel?
Yes, absolutely. And again, one thing has to do with the other. If we're talking about a cartel, we're talking primarily about an organization that traffics drugs in addition to trafficking people. So what I have seen south of the border is an incredible number of young people in their early 20s, in their late teens, and 15 and up, being used not just to sell or try to smuggle drugs, but also to kill rivals, what they call the sicarios or hitmen. And again, there are reasons for this. The reason is you hire a young person in a country that has kind of lax laws against juvenile offenders. You minimize your risk. And also you kind of have a level of separation. These young people have no real direct knowledge of how the cartel operates. Sometimes they're told you're working for a group, let's say the Aztecas, and it's really another group, the Mexicles, who is hiring you. So they really have no inside knowledge of the cartel. So when they're caught, they have nothing really to tell that will betray the cartel. That's why they're being sought. And when it comes to doing the killings, the execution, same reason. You're a 15-year-old. You're probably not going to spend the rest of your life in prison. So there's an incentive, not just for us to use you, but for you to take the money, which is not that much, to the young teenager. $150 is probably a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for your reporting today, Julian. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Just a reminder that we are tracking that developing breaking news out of Dallas where 2 detainees were shot and killed at an ICE facility. We are working to find the condition of the third detainee that was shot and did survive. But if you want any updates on this, make sure to visit borderreport.com, and also make sure to get on our Border Report Live podcast. You can stay informed on the story shaping the U.S.-Mexico border on your commute, while out walking the dog, or maybe you're hitting the gym. You can catch us on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. That is going to do it for us today. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate Julian Resendez, our El Paso correspondent, being here. Didn't get to that Salvador story, but we will get to it tomorrow, I promise you. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great day.